Hi, and welcome to Don't Play This. On this series, I'll show you some awful games and give you some reasons as to why you should never waste your time with them. On today's episode, we'll be looking at a few terrible licensed games. First up is The Simpsons Bart's Nightmare for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. If you were an early adopter to the Super Nintendo, there's a very good chance you played Bart's Nightmare. It came out a year after the Super Nintendo's North American release in October of 1992, so if you ever rented games in the early 90s, this steamer may have ended up in your console. The game's plot revolves around Bart falling asleep while doing his homework. While Bart's sleeping, he has a weird dream where he has to collect pages of his homework, which is the overall goal of the game. The game can be divided into two parts. Half the game you're walking around a neighborhood that Bart lives in, avoiding pretty much everything that moves while trying to find pages of your homework drifting down the street. Even though this is more or less an isometric platformer, in this mode the game controls horribly. Once you find a page of your homework, you have to jump on it, which will take you into a minigame section. You have the choice of two doors which will take you to a minigame based on its color. There are 5 minigames total, each being fairly different from each other. Pretty much all the minigames are fairly bad, and some are worse than others. Green doors will take you to a minigame where you're Bartzilla, and you have to basically make it from one side of the level to the other without dying. The controls are shockingly bad because you're completely unable to move your character. He just walks forward without any command. The rest of the buttons dictate which attack you'll do, but it's confusing because each attack corresponds to the height of enemies coming at you, and it's really easy to forget which button does what. There's a second part to the level where you climb a building, and it's really just an exercise in frustration. You have to dodge things being dropped on you as you climb, but you can't see far enough ahead to dodge, and your movement speed's too slow to dodge anyways. The purple door takes you to a level where you have to blow up microorganisms and collect atoms. After you collect 5 atoms, you beat the level. This is easily the easiest in the minigames, and it offers very little challenge, and again, the controls feel heavy and sluggish. The yellow door takes you to an itchy and scratchy level where you have to defeat the duo using household objects. This teeters from being super hard to super easy. If you can get into the right rhythm, the level becomes incredibly easy, but if you lose that rhythm, your entire life bar can be drained within seconds. This level is also an isometric viewpoint where you can move up and down the screen. However, lining up your attacks is really difficult because it's hard to see where on the plane your attack is. One of the biggest issues with this minigame is how slippery the floor feels. It doesn't feel great moving around. This level is actually probably the funnest part of the entire game of Bart's Nightmare, but it's still not good when compared to most games. The blue door takes you to a flying level that's fairly boring and has fairly poor controls as well. It's incredibly hard to dodge stuff on this level because of the number of things coming at you and the stiff controls, but nothing really does enough damage to kill you. This is probably the longest minigame, and it's fairly easy to beat on your first try. The final minigame, the orange door, is one of the most punishing and god-awful things I've ever played. The level is similar to Indiana Jones, where you're in a temple and the floors are booby-trapped. However, some of the blocks you're jumping on can fall out from beneath you, and many of the booby traps will one-hit kill you. Combine this with enemies that you have to dodge, and you have a really horrible combination. The orange door level is one of the most frustrating levels I've ever played on any game, and this minigame alone almost spoils the entire game. I actually tried to beat this game many times after getting my Super Nintendo, and it left a horrible taste in my mouth. The Simpsons Bart's Nightmare is a really awful package of minigames with very few redeeming qualities that no one should ever play. Don't play Bart's Nightmare. Next up is a PAL region only game for the Super Nintendo, the Smurfs. The Smurfs was released in 1994 in Europe and was planned to have a release in the US in 1996. However, it was cancelled due to the popularity of the N64 and the PlayStation. This is a fairly obscure title to play here in the US, but don't worry, you're not missing out on much. The Smurfs for the SNES. It's a game! And by that, I mean it's one of the most generic, boring side-scrollers I've ever played. There's nothing remarkable about this game. There's no power-ups other than extra lives and health. The ledges on the levels aren't well defined, so you can jump through what you think might be a ledge often, and the controls are unresponsive, and the graphics really aren't impressive either. Level design is also bland and repetitive. On the second level there's a tree that you have to climb up that has you doing pretty much the same thing over and over again for 5 minutes trying to climb it, and it has multiple things that can hit you and knock you down to the bottom of the tree. It's the simplest side-scrolling platformer I think I've ever played. It really seems like the game's designers took the least amount of effort they possibly could while making it. The worst part of this game is that if you can tolerate it till the third stage, the game dead ends with no feasible way of proceeding. The Smurfs on the Super Nintendo is one of the laziest attempts at a game I've ever played. It's completely uninspired and boring, and since it never came out in the US, there's absolutely no reason to seek this game out. Don't play the Smurfs on the Super Nintendo. It's really bad. Last up is one of the worst games I can remember playing from my childhood. Hook on the NES. Hook on the NES was released in 1991 and to coincide with the release of the film with the same name. Hook on the NES was so bad, I adamantly avoided ever seeing the movie for over 20 years. You may have seen Retro Liberty's review on the SNES version of this game, and it actually looks quite good. However, the NES version is the complete opposite. The goal of each level in the game is to collect all the food on each level, and then make it to the end of the level. You can't beat any of the levels without collecting all the food, making all the levels somewhat non-linear in a really weird way. You'll immediately notice the quality of this game whenever Tinkerbell talks to you, because she'll fly around in a random pattern that looks like she's been nipping off Captain Hook's bottle of rum. There's a lot of cryptic aspects to this game. On one of the levels you can pick up a vacuum cleaner that finds hidden items around the level, and on some levels there's these stars that sometimes you can bounce on to get over water, but it doesn't work all the time. There's also weird guards on some levels that won't let you pass until you collect everything up until that point. It's possible to figure out some of this stuff, but even after having played this game for over 20 years, I still can't figure out everything. One of the worst things about this game is your weapon, or lack thereof. If you hit B, you'll attack using your dagger, which has a shorter range than Zelda 2's sword, and as far as I can tell, it doesn't actually do damage to anything you attack. The controls are really floaty, which you would kind of expect with Peter Pan, but it makes most of the platforming a huge nuisance. I thought the side-scrolling levels had pretty bad controls until I made it to the water level, which was one of the worst controlling water levels I've ever played. Even the stage select in this game is pretty bad, with a little compass that chooses the level. However, when you beat a level, it doesn't show your character moving around on the map. All it changes is the levels that are on the compass, making things really confusing. Hook on the NES is garbage. There's not a single redeeming feature to this game. It almost personifies everything that's terrible about licensed games. The game can be bought for less than $1, but there's absolutely no reason to play this game. And there you have it, 3 games that you should never bother playing. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, as I didn't enjoy playing any of these games. If you can think of any horrible games that you'd like to see me play for these videos, leave them in the comments. Thanks for watching!